Welcome to another edition of We Want to Talk About It Now. This is the first video one that I've done technically, even though I'm not going to use it, just you, Todd. We got Todd on today. We're finishing up our conversation from Into the Abyss Part 1. I think Todd is calling it the bridge or the the bridge between religious divide. Is that it?
Conversations across the divide.
The conversations across the divide.
Yes.
I don't know why, for whatever reason, when you just said it, it reminded me of Far and Away, that movie with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, where it's a manifest destiny. They're trying to get their plots of land out west.
Yeah, Far and Away, right?
Yeah, for whatever reason, that's what I thought of right then. So now that everybody's got to listen to that, yeah. So following up, the very first one was basically me complaining the entire time, and it's funny, the feedback that your feedback was obviously different than my feedback, but the feedback that I got from it, from people was like, Alex, you seem so mean and combative towards Todd. I'm just like, well, thankfully Todd knows that I'm attacking an idea, and it's not even like your ideas. I'm attacking all of these ideas, but it's just unfortunate that Todd has to like listen to it and essentially be the sounding board for my problems that I have with religion in particular. But I do just want to caveat that for anyone who's didn't listen to the first one, it's because I took it serious. I took my religion so serious to the point of severe depression every time that I broke the law of chastity. Like I really believed in everything. So over time, as you start to realize that maybe like this isn't as serious as everyone else took it, it's a little frustrating. You get jealous. I think on ours, like we talked about, I don't want to get specifically into Mormonism, but keeping the Sabbath day holy, how you don't watch TV, you're at home, you can watch Mormon videos, like the animated ones, or read your scriptures, pray, whatever, talk with family. And then other people would like people would go swimming and all this stuff. Like we took it seriously anyways. But I think for you, because of the conversations that we've had, Todd, what I'm most curious about is a thing that I brought up during our conversation was how Mormonism is almost like the Greeks of old. And to flesh that out a little more, what I meant by that is each doctrine, each principle is a separate God. And it seems like in all of religion, depending on how fundamentalist you are, people will pick and choose the cafeteria Christian idea where you pick and choose what you want, similar to how the Greeks used to do it. There were Greeks who were all in and believed in all the gods. But then there were people who were like, you know what? I just like the party god. I just like Zeus. I just like whatever god it may be. And so I'm curious, Todd, if you were going to make an amalgam of all of the different doctrines, principles, things you've learned through your life of God, what's that God looking like? What are like his 5 focus things? God's 5 focus things.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. I like that. So principally, I'll start theoretically and then get more to like why it's personal and important. So on a theoretical level, I think the scriptures give a pretty good description or definition of what God is. So the first one would be in Exodus, where Moses is meeting God and asks, "Who are you? What's your name?" And he says, "I am that I am." And so it's a description of self-existence, of being. Another one would be in the beginning of John, where it says everything that has being, or nothing that has being came into being without him. So basically, that God is the source of all things that are, and that everything that has being has that source in God. So that is like a definition of what God is, and that's pretty abstract and theoretical. So that'd be like the first of the 5. I don't know if I'll get to 5. The second would be that God is love, and I think that's a pretty good personal and affective and emotional principle to follow in understanding who God is and understanding what God is like. And actually, I think I'll just leave it at those 2. Those are the 2 big ones. And I guess you could say that those are, for me, those are the ways of thinking, okay, why do I uh, believe in God? Because I think that first one of God as being itself, as the ground of being, that's one reason why I believe in God, why I think it's a rational thing. And then the second one, as God is love, is that's why it matters to me, and I um, why I love God back, or why I am motivated to be a better person.
So one is existence and one is love. If I can just making
Hmm.
sure that I'm on point with you.
Yeah, yeah.
So then that would needlessly lead me to the next question. Uh, Not needlessly, that's the wrong word. Um, to the idea of then what is love and how that is an expression, how you express it the way that this existence person wants you to express it.
Hmm. Yeah. That yeah, that's interesting. So love, that's a tough one to describe in words, because it's I mean, it's principally an emotion. Well, I guess that's a position that one could take up. I mean, I guess love could also be considered actions, right? That it's acting ethically towards another person and doesn't really have anything to do with emotions, but you demonstrate love to somebody by treating them in an ethical and responsible way. And I think that's a defensible point. But then there's also an emotion of affection, which I think is also part of it. I think both of those would tie into it. Um,
Well, do you know like the theory of, I was going to say large numbers. That's not it. The theory of like the more choices you have, the more disappointed you are with your choices.
yeah.
So in this situation, I like that you have boiled God down to two things. One, just really it's the existence of love. God is the existence of love. And I
Hmm.
like the idea of a physical demonstration of the emotion of love being like God is like, because that's the scripture too. God is love.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
and so I think where the confusion then comes is to that expression of love, because as you're speaking, you say the thing, treating others ethically, and then demonstrating that love to them as well. And then obviously it almost gets a little bit nitpicky and then it gets granular, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's where the complication comes is a lot of humans want to be told specifically what they need to do. Whereas if they could just take this general idea and then just try to live to that general idea as best, that guiding principle as best as possible, it's almost like the what would Jesus do? Like each time you ask a
Right.
question, what would Jesus do? I think that's a, as much as like we make fun of that question and then like you add anybody's name, WWAD, what would Alex do? WWTD, what would Todd do? Like all these different like little joke variations of it. It
Yeah.
really is a sound principle, like
Hmm.
especially when you think of Jesus as the symbol of perfection. My concern is how, with billions upon billions of people, you kind of teach that and get people, especially, I know that I have that I want to talk about free will. We obviously believe, at least how we grew up, that we get to choose. So I don't know if it's a matter of trying to convince people to change their behaviors, but at least I'll get it on the same page. Does that make sense? Where like we all
Hmm.
kind of agree on one thing. Because your statement, God is love, and love, I love that redundancy, but I just don't see it in practice done very well. I'm
Yep.
not, this isn't a judgment of you, just
Right.
like
Yeah.
people in general, myself included.
Right. That. Yes, and is part of it also that uh, there's a lot of unloving things that are done and practiced and said in the exercise of religion or in the name of God. So bringing love out as one of the first principles seems not to square with um, the way religion is practiced in the real world. Or at least that's a thought that occurred to me, but I don't know if that was something
And to
you were
be fair
thinking
to
of.
religion, sometimes I think it's a better version of, no, I don't even agree with that. It's just, the natural man argument,
Hmm. Yeah.
wherever we just have like these natural tendencies in air quotes for power, domination is, I think, the two negative qualities that got, geez Louise, get
Hmm.
brought up the most.
Hmm.
And you get to, in religion, you see that power just being used under a religious context with this all being God as like the excuse for it. So I think
Yeah.
of kings and queens, the deity. I forget. I don't even know how you say that. It's too early in the morning for me to remember all these words. But like the god kings and all
Uh-huh.
of those different types using God, who there's no way for any of us to know if God is actually saying that these people are god kings or not. That's a frustration of mine.
Hmm.
But I don't want to go stray too far. Going back to, if you follow that principle that you initially outlined, there shouldn't be a problem. But I just don't know how you
Right.
get everybody to get to that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's part of why I think it's good to um, have these conversations, right? That, I mean, that's part of the reason why um, I've been wanting to talk with people. And even though my own podcast doesn't officially have a theme, it kind of has been picking up this type of topic of figuring out, okay, what are we doing with, if religion is is kind of a toolbox for thinking and acting, how do we apply that in the most effective ways? What does it mean? Um, and so I see a lot of development in the history of religion that's had a lot of fits and starts, a lot of uh, detours into areas that we definitely don't want to repeat. Um, but I think part of what we're getting at here is there's this trend toward being more universal and being able to encompass more than just a tribe, more than just your nation, but everyone in the world, and maybe eventually all living things. So one of the problems right now is that there are lots of different religions, and there's tribalism that goes into that. And tribalism is a very human tendency. We definitely see it with politics, but certainly with religion as well.
Would
That
you just, sorry to cut, I know you're on a train of thought, but
yeah.
you really view it as a problem? Or is that just a word you're using to describe the situation?
Oh,
Because you said it's a
it's a
problem that
problem.
we have multiple religions. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, I do think there's I don't think it's a problem to be eliminated, but a problem to be addressed. So I guess a problem more in that first sense,
I like that.
or
That makes
like
sense.
it's something to think about and something to work through, but not necessarily eliminate. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, uh, but the part of it that is a problem in the strong sense is that it creates this animosity between people of the different groups, right? It can be a productive problem in people coming together and saying, oh, this is what I was taught, this is the way I've seen things, how do you see things? And they look at the differences and maybe figure out some way to resolve them and grasp a higher truth. But where that doesn't happen, and it's just, well, we're either going to not associate with you, we're going to hate you, or at a more extreme level, we're going to kill you or annihilate you, then that's obviously that's the big problem that should be eliminated. Um, but I'm interested in the other process where people get together and figure out, okay, how do we distill uh, the truths that are common to us and figure out a way to make them universal so that everybody is ultimately part of the same tribe. So Jesus had this line of loving your enemies. One way I've kind of thought of that is just don't have any enemies. Uh, but that's not always our choice, right? Sometimes people are enemies to us, whether we like it or not. So we should love them. But I think even better is to try and to make enemies not enemies anymore. Uh, and so that we can have this principle of God as love being applied um, everywhere. But that's a very long-term process. So the Bible is a story that goes over thousands of years, and I don't see it as something that's complete. I see it as ongoing, um,
You
probably
think,
as long as there are people.
do you think it's a long-term problem that will be fixed, not necessarily in our lifetime, but that obviously at some point, whether you believe or not, the world ends? But like, do you think it's one of those problems that we'll be able to fix before that we meet that end, before
Yeah,
either
yeah.
God steps in and stops it? I mean, technically, from a Christian standpoint, the world has to get terrible before Jesus comes back anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So I just imagine, at least from a religious standpoint, no. But I don't know. I'm trying to be more optimistic. I know that I come across as super pessimistic, but I've just been really encouraged by a lot of private conversations I have.
Mm-hmm.
Public conversations have not been that great, not just for religion, but like for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And there really are a lot of people who are just like, I don't care, man. Like, I'm just here for the ride. And so I think that we can
Yeah.
solve it, but then that almost spits in the face of Christianity and all religions by saying like, yeah, we can solve this problem. Like we can fix it before Jesus has to come back.
Yeah. So there's this idea that's in Christian theology. I think it developed in the 1800s. So it's premillennialism and postmillennialism. And the idea of premillennialism, and I always get them mixed up, but I think it's premillennialism. Premillennialism is the idea that we can create um, create the paradise state, or the conditions of the millennium before Christ comes, and that it's largely something that is done by humanity, that is not just brought about by pure miracle or divine force. And then the opposite view being that there's kind of this culmination of things just getting horrible and then resolved but by divine force. Scripturally, I think that that's not as clearly in the direction of uh, death, pure death and destruction leading up to Christ's coming, as we might think. So the Book of Revelation isn't the clearest of books, and what it means, and it probably
I
applies
disagree.
more.
Have you not read section? Oh, I don't even. I'm not even going to be able to land the joke. Just keep. Sorry, Todd. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that Joseph Smith said it
The
was
Joseph Smith
the
Revelations. Yeah, the
clearest of books.
clarification. It's very clear.
Yeah, but it probably has more to do with stuff that was happening back in the times it was written than now. So it's not altogether clear that probably the most famous narrative of the world getting worse until God fixes it apart from us is the correct narrative.
Would
So I think it's possible that it is resolved also by human efforts.
Would you want it to be clear, like just like steps laid out, like not just the Book of Revelations, but just like to know exactly how everything's going to end? Because that's kind of a topic that came up in our last one,
Yeah,
where it's like
yeah.
even if we knew everything, like I know. So this is a really good example. So I know, for example, alcohol. I know alcohol is long-term bad for me, but I will
Hmm.
still use it on occasion. And so I think even if we know everything, we're still not going to conform perfectly with that knowledge.
Yeah.
Is that something that you'd even want?
I think all of us probably want it at some level. I don't know if I really like figuring things out. So I think I would probably enjoy having it, but it not being perfectly transparent, because that might be boring. But that's more of
Mhm.
a personality thing. Probably if I were just to draft the fabric of reality and say, okay, this is how I want things to be, I would say, yeah, let's make a clear instruction manual that everyone can read easily and understand. I mean, probably most people would say, yeah, that would be nice. But that's just not the way things are. So it's just a counterfactual. But I mean, I get the point that, okay, why can't things be that way? But
As you're talking about, I don't even know if I would want that, because the Andy Bernard quote is one of my favorite quotes from the final episode of The Office, where he says, "Don't you wish you knew you were in the good old days before they were over?" So
yeah,
sometimes I feel like just knowing everything and how it's going to be and would probably kind of ruin it. There's something special about looking back. There's a reason that we have, when we get together with people that we've had in our past and our histories, that there's something nostalgic and enjoyable about it, just reminiscing about the good old times.
Mhm.
But if we already knew what was going to happen, I wonder how interesting it would be to talk like, oh, well, we knew that. Anyways, it's not a very important thing. But
Well,
I think it's more fun not knowing.
yes. Now, I to be fair, I think that there are especially ethical instances in the way that we treat other people where it would definitely, I would want to say we should have that clearly laid out. Like, I think for certain things that are a little bit more mystical or abstract, I do think there's an element of enjoyment to it. I certainly have it, but where it's like, okay, how are we going to treat people? Or like, is homosexuality something that should be completely condemned or not?
Great
Where,
question.
those type of things. Um, if it's not, and the Bible leads us to think otherwise, uh, that's something where it's something that disturbs me, right? Like that, the fact that it's leading us in one direction, and now maybe we're thinking that things are otherwise. Um, is is a problem, and that's one thing where it gets back to, um, I wish it were. I wish in that case it weren't something that was just developing over time, and that we could spare ourselves the heartache that comes about in that process. Um, but that's just not the way things have worked out. So we have to do the best we can with the way things are.
How do we, so long question. So how do we figure out what is true and what is right? I keep seeing people posting things that's like, right is right, wrong is wrong. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
that, first off, that's meaningless. Right is right to you, wrong is wrong to you. My
Right.
right is different than your right, your wrong is different than my wrong. Because like I think in like the Old Testament, I'm just like, and I know it was the old law, and that's usually what they say, like the specificity that is provided to them about what they have to do. And
Hmm.
obviously this is just for Christianity. It doesn't seem to be as specific now, and generally it's for very stupid things. It's not for things that make a difference in reality. It'll be like, you can walk, I just offended the entire Jewish culture, you can walk 1,000 steps today. Like, it's weird how where God decided to be super specific and
Yeah,
not
that's
be
not in the
specific.
Bible, by the way, but just so you know.
Yeah, fair,
Yeah.
fair. But there are, is that like it? What is it in for a learning experience?
um,
But are there some like
that
maybe
might
it's
be in
not
the
that specific law, but are
yeah,
there weird like specific things where it's like,
yeah. Oh, definitely.
okay, okay.
Ritualistic things. Yeah. Um,
But essentially the question is like, I don't even know how one comes to a knowledge of truth when there are so many like this. Like I said last time, I was like Joseph Smith, just trying to find there's so many different options out there. How does one even find what is and isn't correct? And once again, is it even worth exploring?
yeah. Oh well. On the second point, is it worth exploring? I mean, uh, my element of faith here is that it is, and that's really what gets me into this whole project in the first place, both in religion and in philosophy. Um, that these are things that are engaging, energizing, and very much worth exploring. Although I say it's an element of faith because I can't. That's not really something I can prove, other than to just say that it's something that I experience, and makes my life valuable, and one of the things that drives me. Right, um, and that may be one of the things that characterizes me as an enthusiastically religious person. At least one of the things that it does. But I'm trying to remember what the first part of your question was.
Like
Oh,
how we discover the truth.
how do we discover truth? Yeah, well,
And
that's
it sucks. And like, just to be fair, I want to try to have as few semantic things as possible, because it's just like, I know that
yes,
I'm not that you're going to do this, but like, I know people go, well, what type of truth are you talking
yeah.
about? I just mean like, whatever truth means to a single person, of like being able to, we all can agree that this is a thing we should be doing or not
Yep.
doing.
Yeah, that's a good point, because one of the things I'm trying to do also, I mean, I do use a lot of, but on the one hand, I do like using jargon and things as I get into stuff, but more in the conversations and stuff where I want a wide audience. I want things to be relatable, as like this whole
Thank you.
project, not just to you, but I could say anything to you. So okay, but yeah, how do we discover or understand truth? Yeah, I agree. It's a big question. I mean, reason obviously is one of the big things, right? So just looking at ideas and understanding, okay, if something, if there's a contradiction in or inconsistency in the way that we're thinking, then that's an indication that something's in error, right? So reason is definitely one. Looking at uh, empirical facts, so basically this I haven't gotten to religion
So
yet, but these are just the basic.
empirical meaning things that can be tested and
Right,
reported
yeah,
on.
yeah, things in the world, right? So
I
either
know
you're
my audience. They're gonna
so
they're
yeah,
gonna they're gonna need help with that word, because I needed help with it about a
no
few years ago.
problem. So just looking at the way the world is around you, um and seeing it, testing it if it gets to that point, but usually we, just regular people, we're just looking at the way things are. So those are, so yeah, reason and just looking at the facts of the world around us are two of the big ways of understanding truth. When it gets into like right and wrong, and ethics, I think it can work for that as well. So on the second point of like looking at the way things work, the way things are, just paying attention to people around you and how they respond to things. Like, okay, if I do this, does that hurt someone? Does that hurt their feelings? Does it hurt them physically? Probably more these days, living in a relatively civilized society, it's going to be more hurting feelings, offending people, which yeah, that can go overboard, but by and large, we should try not to do that.
Isn't it so awesome that we live in that time, though? Sorry, keep
It
going.
is very nice. Yes, it is very nice.
That our feelings are what we have to be concerned about, not getting our hands cut off.
It's definitely progress. It's definitely progress.
Go humans,
Yeah,
doing so well.
right. And so and then I guess I haven't mentioned scripture yet, but I do think scripture is a source for understanding truth. I don't. It's not for me a primary source, as it would be for somebody who's like an infallibilist. So that, or basically meaning like the Bible is,
Scriptures
yeah, it's accurate and no
perfect
errors. It's going to lead you around truth
in
in all
circles.
instances. um,
Sorry, that was cheap
um,
and not even very funny.
now that's not the way that I view the Bible, but I would say I do take the Bible seriously. So for men, at the beginning of our conversation here, you talked about taking things seriously, and I would want to say that I take things seriously as well, even if that's sometimes with qualification, um, or yeah, yeah, just that I may need to add appendices to certain things. So, like, taking the Bible seriously doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to take everything at face value. But just having I've read the Bible through many times, and still doing that and trying to understand it. I find it a very interesting collection of writings, and I do think it is a fundamental part of the history of God, or the actions of God in history. So would I say it's true? Yes, I do. I do think the Bible is true. Um, um, from the broad view, but I do think there are things in it that are not. And I mean, there are even parts of the Bible that contradict itself in factual matters. So, like in First and Second Kings versus in First and Second Chronicles. I mean, that's not that interesting, but just where it talks about different numerical quantities of things that happened, or factual or historical events. It's probably more in the moral things that are more interesting to people, like if the Bible says such and such. But we know even from the Bible itself that there's development, right? So in some parts of the Bible it says that you shall not eat this type of food, and then later it says what God has cleansed don't call common, and that you can basically eat all things that God has made now. It's not exactly a contradiction, it's a development, but I think that is instructive. So basically what I'm getting at is, okay, so how do we come at truth? Um, there are ways to get at the more intangible truths through texts that are part of human history. And the Bible is one example of that. I think it's probably one of the most important. But also in literature and poetry is another example where it's stuff that you're not looking at it in the same way as you would for scientific truth. But in understanding what it means to live a life, to live in a society, you're pulling insights from those, either by what it says or just from the process of interpretation. You're learning things.
Poetry and art, you're specifically referring to all poetry and art, not necessarily religious poetry and art.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so you're comparing these religious texts that we have to the general poetry and art that we have in reality. And not that the Bible isn't real, but similarly saying that the Bible itself is also that poetry and art.
Yeah. Very similar application. I think it probably makes more sense to read the Bible in that way. I mean, it definitely the Bible isn't something that's going to be, or that should be read as a textbook of raw facts. I actually do read textbooks sometimes, but
you really got to stop admitting stuff.
I know. And they are nice, and it's just like, it's direct. It's like, okay, here's.
I'm waiting for the conversation we have. We're like, yeah, I killed a family of 4 10 years ago. You admit to some weird stuff, Todd. You admit to some weird stuff on this. But I love it. I love it at the same.
It'll be mentioned just parenthetically.
But as I'm being right there, so nobody thinks I'm mean to Todd, I also just want to state, like, you are one of probably like 10 to 20 people in my life where every time I have the conversation, I just know the rest of my day I'm going to feel good. Like, just having this conversation, listening to Todd, it's like, you want to know what? There's hope in the world. So, sorry. So keep going. Poetry and art in the Bible. Sorry.
No, that's good. No. So yeah, with the Bible, it's closer to those. I mean, there are historical facts in the Bible, certainly, but it's going to be more. It's more stories, right? There's a lot of poetry in the Bible. There are stories in the Bible, and it's just the kind of thing where people bring their ideas to it and bounce them off of it. So, like in rabbinic interpretation of the Bible, I mean, there are reams and reams of commentaries.
Rabbinic, meaning a rabbi.
Yeah. So in the history of Jewish interpretation, right?
Sorry.
There are reams and reams of commentaries that have developed over hundreds of years that are much, much longer than the Bible itself. But people interacting with it and coming up with ideas in response to it. And in a way similar to literature, right? I mean, the way people respond to Shakespeare and vastly outstrips anything in quantity that Shakespeare ever said, but that's because his writing is so dense in possibility. So yes, I do approach the Bible more in that way.
So partially symbolic, partially factual.
Oh yeah.
If you're going to put a number on it, how much would you say is more the symbolic storytelling, and how much is actually real events that occurred? I know it's hard, but hey, you yourself admit it. You've read the Bible a billion times, so you should be able to have a
that number, right? Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I think the events that occurred is pretty high, because a lot of it is so in the middle of the Hebrew Bible, a lot of it's just the events of political events, right? Of the different kings and that. So in Old Testament, it's probably about 30% maybe that's historical, and then a lot of it's like, if you get into Proverbs, Psalms, Job, all those. I mean, those are poetic books, or the books of the prophets. It's kind of hard to say, are they I mean, they're historical because these were real people, but they're not. that's kind of both, right? So it's historical and also prophetic. Um, so for example, Isaiah was a real person. I mean, that's pretty much a consensus view. He was a real person, and wrote the things that he wrote. I mean, it's been transcribed several times, but it's probably pretty close to what he said. So is Isaiah history, or is it poetry, or is it prophecy? I mean, it's kind of all of those. Um, and then the New Testament, definitely, that's, history in the sense that we have it today is very different from then. I mean, it's not meant to be as a documentary history that's just relaying facts, right? I mean, there's definitely lessons that are meant to be taught in it, and things that are um, uh, changed in the story to make things fit together. Like a lot of the scholarship in the New Testament looks at the ways Mark arranges things versus the way Matthew arranges things for narrative effect. But I mean, just the fact that Jesus lived and probably did most of the things that are written in those books, I mean, I think is a pretty safe thing to say. And that's I believe that Jesus Christ was resurrected. That is one of my literal beliefs. But it's probably the case that some of the stories aren't exactly the way things happened, because they were transmitted orally over a long time. So I don't think it's necessary for orthodoxy to think of it as like a frame by frame uh, um, reproduction of the history. But
So another problematic thing, as you've been describing that, is we're focusing pretty heavily on. I know that we talked that we wanted to stay away from Mormonism. So what we did is apparently focus on Judaism and Christianity.
mm-hmm.
But then the problem is, and I'm being generous with numbers here, 2 billion out of the 7 billion people on the earth probably don't. I mean, except for the first like 6 chapters of Genesis for Islam. Um, do you feel like it is your responsibility as someone who believes in these things to then go, all right, these 5 billion other people, they need to also believe that the Bible and Jesus was resurrected and is the Christ? Like, do you feel like that is part of your calling in life?
Sort of, but not as in it's not as pressing as it would be for like an evangelical. Um, so um, so for somebody who's Muslim, for instance, if do I feel like I need like the whole all those countries of Muslim majority populations that they need to convert to Christianity? No, I don't think that's necessary for either their uh, mortal existence or eternal existence. I think we mentioned last time that I'm basically a universalist in thinking that whatever the afterlife is like, we're probably going to be taken care of in a good way. um, and that's just
Thank you for the clarification.
For clarifying.
I could just tell by your voice it was positive. It would be like, we're going to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Then I would have known it was the bad way.
But I do think that Christianity is true. And I think that it has, even in just a mortal life, has a lot to recommend it. And so in that way, I would say yes, I would want to at least share my thoughts with people, and if they feel that they want to adopt them, appropriate them, or even convert, then that would be wonderful as well. My focus is, or my interest is more in bringing Christianity as an option, something to investigate to the secular world again, because I think if you're going to connect with human history and Western culture, the culture of Western history, you have to have some type of connection via Christianity. because without that, I mean, you're going to be pretty much cut off from a lot of the the treasury of knowledge and ways of thinking and approaching life that have been accumulating for hundreds of years. And a lot of that has been through Christianity, and part of that is also even pre-Christian. So, like in Greek history and Roman history, I think also that's important to use and be aware of. But for the last 2,000 years, Christianity has been the vehicle for a lot of those ideas in ways that I think secular people should engage with, whether they want to say, "Oh, I'm going to be Christian" or "I'm going to convert." I think it's something to understand and appreciate and be aware of and utilize.
But but I feel like you're giving a lot of credit. Like, I understand that Christianity has been the popular religion for like the last 2,000 years or whatever, but I still go back to, but we're discounting uh 2/3 of the world still. Like, I agree, like for Western
Yeah,
culture,
well,
absolutely.
I mean, this is
Like,
where we are, right?
on
So,
face value, as you said, like when you're looking at just Western culture, um absolutely. But then also you threw that caveat in there that was nice as well, where you said, we should also look at Greek and Roman history, since that also has influenced a lot
oh
of
yeah,
things as
and that's
well.
not even a caveat. I mean, that's pretty central to what interests me. Like,
I'm just still concerned, and honestly, when I say concerned, I mean for the entire human race. I guess I'm
mhm,
still concerned with like what's really important that somebody knows, because I don't feel like Christianity was the vehicle, or even religion for that matter.
mhm.
I don't think it was like, all right, we can't kill each other because there's this bad place that you'll go to after this life, or there's this good deity in the sky that doesn't want us to do it.
Mhm.
I think humans just realized from an evolutionary standpoint, it wasn't beneficial for us to kill one another if we wanted to thrive, because then you
Yeah, I
obviously, then we
actually
start killing each other in war and whatnot, but
I
that's
think that's
for
I don't think
power and
that's
control.
completely yeah I don't think that's historically accurate entirely. I mean, so part of that, it's hard to say because there have been billions of people in this whole process, but um, the valuing of human life that's not aristocratic, um, I think, has been a very Christian idea. So, for example, in the transition from Roman paganism to Christianity definitely had a shift in the way that we're going to view people who could be previously seen as defective or just not mattering, uh, because wealth and status were um,
Okay.
definitely a major issue. So, like in Greece, for example, Achilles had the option of just living out life, a long life as just a commoner, a nobody, or being a great man who would die in battle at a young age. And he wanted to be a great man because that's what everything was. Where Christianity brought in this idea that no, all human life is important. It's not just about nobility, about being a great person. The Jesus was not a person of significance. That's why he was crucified as a commoner in the most degrading manner possible, and we made this person into our God. Um, either made him or just recognized that as the fact, right? That God was the lowest of the low. Um, and have we been consistent with that? No. But I think it's important to recognize that in a lot of human history, especially the fight against slavery, which lasted for several centuries and is arguably still ongoing,
Yeah.
that that was inspired by a lot of people who took their religion seriously, and uh, to the extent that it was overlooked, it was either done by people just not taking Christian injunctions seriously, or torturing the concepts in a way that they could use to justify it. I mean, it's often brought up that Christianity was justified by the story of Ham and the curse of Noah on Canaan. And yeah, that's true, but I think that that's not the weightier side of the story of Christian engagement with slavery. Abolition was definitely religiously inspired. The civil rights movement was very religiously inspired. And even back in the days of the conquest of the Americas, we look back and think, well, Columbus, he was just a product of his times. He was just doing what was normal. Far from it. De las Casas was one of these friars that was over there, and he was appalled by the way that the natives were treated, and wrote a book about it that caused a scandal in Spain, and unfortunately it had some unintended consequences of abandoning the slavery of the natives and starting the African slaves trade, which is very unfortunate. But the point being that it's not like people have only realized in the 19th or 20th centuries that, we should treat each other nice, or we should not kill each other. It's been applied, I think, more consistently because of developments of stable governments and changing norms. But people realize for hundreds of years that, we shouldn't be killing each other. We shouldn't be enslaving each other. That those things are definitely wrong.
So do you think Christianity is the best?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I would say it's the best. I do. It's what I believe, and I think it's true. Whether as a tradition, it's what leads to the best life and greatest insights. I'm not really prepared to say that, because I think there are other traditions in the world that have great insights. So, like, I think it's easy to idealize the other, but
when
I
you
do
say
think
true too, like you say, I think that Christianity is true. Is that just meaning like it's a valid thing to follow and try to apply to your life, or do you mean true?
partially. Well,
I just want to
so
make sure I get
partially,
what
right?
that means, because I know, like in Mormonism, like I know the church is true. What always
Yeah.
ours was like 100%. Like we had the full circle, and then there's some people who would do their what's this called, the two circles that
Venn
overlap,
diagram.
Venn diagram, and like ours was perfectly matched up. So what God wanted, what our church had, and then like other churches just kind of match up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so I remember when I was on my mission, we were having lunch, and my companion was writing, just kind of jotting in his notebook, and just thinking about things. And he was looking at that question. I was like, okay, so we say the church is true. What do we mean by that? What does true mean? And I don't think he ever really followed through on that thought or resolved what it was. But but he had said, like, but when we say the church is true, we don't mean true in the way that 1 + 1 = 2 is true. It's a different type of meaning, and I think that's fair. Like, but to answer your question, when I say Christianity is true, I guess on the main points of the existence of God and the resurrection of Christ, I would say are the two main things. I guess I would add just Christ in general as coming and being as God as a human, and dying, and so those are the two big things. Now, beyond that, there's a lot that is, I think, kind of follows in the wake of that, of truth, even if it's metaphorical or non-literal, but that is true in a different sense under that umbrella, right? But it gets fuzzier. But I think that's enough for me to say, oh yeah, Christianity is true. Now, I think that yeah, but I'm not quite willing to say it's the best.
Well, because it's, I know I already asked you this question, but it's just something that I'm really curious about, because obviously, if what you say is true, it's very, very important.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I just go back to what is our, we're talking about literal salvation in a eternal afterlife. So I'm just a little bit surprised when I ask the question, how important is it to you to go and like kind of spread, not spread, I don't want to like spread the word like you're a missionary,
Mm-hmm.
but like I almost feel like every single person's goal in life should be cast your nets to the other side and go and give this to other people so that they also have it, which that's high standards to hold someone to that I won't even hold
Right.
myself to be fair. But if you have eternal salvation, that's something that I would just assume you'd want to give. If I had a pill that meant you're not going to age, which might suck, but you're not going to age, you're not going to feel pain, I would want to get that to as, it'll cure cancer. I'd want to get that to as many people as possible at a price. But I'd like to get that to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Well, my universalism might um, weaken my resolve on that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because um, and maybe that's an
Is
argument
that
to.
insecurity? Like insecurity in the kindest way of saying that word. Like I'm very confident what I believe to be true, but I'm not confident enough that I'm going to start
Oh,
forcing this on everybody.
absolutely. Yeah. I don't mean for a second to say that I'm confident or know with every fiber of my being in these things, right? It's very, very much not. Um, so I'm just a person who's working things out and figuring things out in my life, and um, in the best way possible. But yeah, for not a moment, at least presently, do I think got it all figured out.
Is
Or
that why you hate apologetics? Or do you hate apologetics?
did I
Maybe I
did I
should
say I
start
hate?
there. I just got the feeling, well, like when we were chatting, you're like, I don't want to like be an apologist for the church. And I also don't feel like you're right now, the way that we're talking, you're being an apologist for like religion either. The
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
that I say this, because I always feel like apologists are like, we got to find, so your empirical um, view of the world.
Hmm.
I feel like that's what apologists try to do. They try to be like, look, we can prove all of this stuff. Like, look how accurate it is. But the thing that has always bothered me about that was like, aren't you a faith-based religion? Like, aren't all things
Oh yeah.
faith-based? Sorry, that's
um,
just a thought.
yeah. I was gonna say, did I say I hate apologetics?
Hate's the wrong word.
Yeah, in our conversations before.
Yeah.
So apologetics. Well, I think of myself as kind of an apologist in a certain sense. So it's this like kind of okay. Let's take another look at this.
I hate the
There's
word
probably
apologist. Apologist makes it sound like you're coming from a position of inferiority, and I don't
it
think necessarily that is the case every time.
correct. Yeah. Well, and there's unfortunate linguistic baggage
Yeah,
there. So
apology, exactly.
right, it didn't originally mean that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's but I guess in there are, for example, I think that there are atheists apologists for Christianity. So uh, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Tom Holland. So not the actor Tom Holland, but there's an author, Tom Holland, who wrote a book about the history of Christianity that's basically about some of the stuff I was talking about earlier with the impact of Christianity on the softening of our violent tendencies in the development of Western culture. But basically, he's coming at it at a point saying, "Hey, um, some of the sensationalist and negative portrayals of Christianity aren't quite right. There's another side to this story." And I consider that a kind of apologetic. Now, as far as like the real strong apologetics is like, we can prove that God exists, like because of the fine tuning of the universe, or from irreducible complexity in the complexity of biochemistry, right, of the way uh, life has been structured, or from archaeology and history. Um, I guess I don't have a big problem with them, other than that those aren't things that I find super convincing. Um, and probably the fine tuning of the universe is probably the one that goes the farthest way, but it's not one that is something I found my religion on. Um, so I don't mind that it exists. I don't mind that people are doing it, and I think it can be interesting. Um, and but it's my apologetics are more looking at a way of life and looking at the utility of it, um, and also the truth of it. So like so as far as the existence of God, theism, if we wanted to expand beyond just Christianity and to more of the world, we could either say theism, or just that there is there is a transcendent reality, right? I think that's probably something that encompasses most things that we would call religion. Um, I think I am convinced of that, mostly on intellectual grounds, and I think that's interesting, just
It's
because I like.
interesting that you're mainly convinced about it on intellectual ground.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in that. Like, so most of it from the readings that you have, like, so for example, in Mormonism, what a lot of people will say is, I was converted by the Holy Spirit, or something was made manifest to me.
Hmm.
But from you, it's a lot of just reading and viewing the world around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think that that's useful, or it's something that's interesting and compelling to me, and I think it's a reason to look deeper and closer into things. That there's more to the world than meets the eye, and I think that that's um, a uh, a very religious impulse that I think is shared not just by Christianity, but I think as you get into the Eastern religions, or even um, uh, smaller religious groups. I want to trying to think of the correct word for it, but we'll just say native religions
Cult?
for.
Oh, okay.
Okay. No.
For smaller
Probably not
religions.
probably not cults so much, actually. Um,
Get
but
1,000 people, you graduate to religion.
no.
Sorry,
Like, so like
I'm
native
sorry. I don't want
religions.
to offend any of
Yeah.
your listeners. I'm just kidding. I try to use that word as little as possible. I literally was just trying to find what word you're looking for.
Yeah.
It led me down a dark, dark, terrible, terrible line of thought.
It did. It did.
Just finished a
um,
song called Jonestown, so it's been on my mind a lot recently.
Yeah. Well, and I want to address how we talked about. So in our last conversation, we focused a lot on Mormonism.
Mhm.
I don't have any taboo for now of talking about Mormonism, but it's more that I guess a lot of the issues you brought up are. I guess they're not issues that concern me as much, because my focus is a little bit broader
Broader.
than Mormonism. It's more
Cool.
to Christianity generally, and theism. But I mean, I am a Mormon, and I think that's the church I go to, and it's the way that I practice Christianity. But a lot of the specifics, they're just not things that I'm really. So like Mormon apologetics of Book of Mormon historicity, or what Joseph Smith was doing in his life. I've read a lot of that stuff, but it's not something that's like my primary focus at the moment. Just because
And to
I'm
be honest, I have
interested in other things.
cared less and less about stuff like that as time
Mm-hmm.
has gone on. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is, because I nobody no I have never inspired anyone to leave the church, and that's never been like a goal of mine
Mm-hmm.
either. I think just as long as you're a happy person in general, that's going to be like the best thing for you. Like, do whatever you want. So I don't want to make it sound like that's what I wanted to talk about with you. Like, hey, can we talk about Mormonism? Like,
Right.
I like that we're talking less and less about it. It's actually
Well, it's
good for
more
my
pertinent
goals.
to me, right? I mean, I wouldn't feel
Yeah.
as is it. since it's not something I've been focusing on as much recently, it's a little bit more foreign to where I'm at. But yeah, but I don't want to make it out like it's not at all part of my life. Of course, well, I was going to say I go to the Mormon church every Sunday, or used to, in
before COVID.
pre-COVID times. I actually am going today, but with a mask.
Hey, congratulations! I think. I don't know.
And the Book of Mormon is something that I'm not focused on a whole lot right now, because I'm kind of focusing on the Bible in my studies. But the Book of Mormon is kind of on my list of to understand.
That's
okay, what's
step
going
one,
on?
Todd. Step
I know, right?
one of leaving. That I don't recommend it, dude.
No. So, but what is it like?
For a friend.
So because we talked earlier about with the Bible, the Bible, I think, does definitely have a lot of history that's independently verifiable, even though it's a lot of other stuff wrapped into it as well. The Book of Mormon, to what extent is it historical? I that's not something I'm really getting into right now, but I've as far as a scriptural book, and things that I get insights out of, that's definitely an important resource. I probably in anytime I get into deep conversation, I feel myself channeling the Book of Mormon, like things come out. So so the idea is, especially in Lehi's discussion of opposition in all things, and that there needs to be enticement on the one hand to the other, those type of things. Those are things that just come out as I'm talking about things. So it's definitely something that informs my worldview. So a very important book in that regard. But yeah, it's not something that I have given as much thought to or concerned about, in the keystone of a religion type of sense. So that's the one reason I focus more on.
You can feel free to just say, Alex, I feel like I've already explained this, so I don't want to explain it again. But I still feel like, why is this important to you? Why is this something that you want to know?
Well, so you mean about the Book of Mormon specifically?
No. Just
okay.
It's because you put a lot of, obviously, I butcher this every single time, and people are like, Alex, you're such a bad listener. I'm sorry, I don't write stuff down. But you've read the New Testament in Greek. You've read the Old Testament in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I remember this time. You've put a lot of effort into this. Why?
Yeah.
Not a dismissive why. It's a literal curiosity. Why? What?
Yeah. And when I was talking with Mike on our conversation of grace and Mormonism, he asked me something similar. It's why does that matter to you? It's a very difficult question to answer, and I actually do think that there is probably a religious gene, or probably not a gene, but some suite of genes that induce people to be religious and think about things in religious ways. And just because if there is such a thing, I have it, right? That's a really cheap way of of explaining it, because it really doesn't get into the thought process.
I like that you've eliminated choice from it. You're just I was born with it. I was born with innate curiosity. I'm sorry, Alex.
Well, yeah, but
not everybody gets blessed.
It is important, I think, for me to figure out the thought process behind that, because if I'm going to share that with people and transmit it to people, I need to figure out a way to do that, right? Yeah. Rather than just enjoying it in my own little world in my own head. But it feels like it's continuous to my interest to just understand the way things work in general. So science is another big thing for me. Mathematics and physics, I really get into and enjoy. There's very little practical application for it in my own life. I am an engineer, but at that level, I'm not needing to know general relativity for my day job, right?
That makes sense.
But it still interests me, and the mathematics involved. just because I really like understanding the way the world works. It's almost like a mystical fascination, um, and that overlaps a lot with religion, um, in seeing things, seeing the deeper level of things, right? And just digging in and trying to understand things thoroughly. I think of that as um, very very similar in drive to any type of religious exercise. Um, so yeah, I mean part of it. I do chalk up a bit to a quirk in my personality, but I don't know. I mean, do you get really into things like um, what's your passion?
I mean, apart from drugs, I just love. I won't say this out loud, but Todd and I chatted about both of our audiences and how we can appeal to both of our audiences. So I'm trying to be as edgy as possible without breaking the rule. No, just kidding. Yeah. The answer is yes. To your question, are there things? Yes. Like music's probably one of the things more than
Okay.
anything, especially like entertaining people. Is probably like too big. That's why I do a podcast as well. Yeah, there's things that I get pretty into regularly. But what's different for you is it seems like you have like a very continual stream of this going on. But that's because our interactions with each other are limited to a couple minutes a day when you think about it. Like, even though we're in this group together, like, oh, I read 15 of Todd's posts today, but 15 of Todd's posts took me 5 minutes to read. But it still seems like it's like, well, it's every single day, but you're probably spending time thinking about other things, not just
sure.
I gotta figure out what's the point of this life. I don't need to take this anymore. I know that you're not doing that
after a while. Yeah.
Well, I gotta admit, well, because I don't know if I want to ask this question right now, but I thought it was something useful that I did, pat myself on the back. So I was like, Mormons, this is what I want you to know about people like me, people who have left, and then religious people too. I want you to know like why it was hard for me, why I am the way that I am now, why I am so cynical towards some of the things that you say, do, and act online. What are the things that you want people like me to know, like the secular types, like
Yeah. Oh, you're asking me this now.
because I don't know.
Yeah. What would I want secular people to know? Yeah. Okay, that's a good question.
Especially when talking about when having these types of conversations with one another, because I feel like even though I am hard on, like not hard on you sometimes, like I'm a little tongue in cheek, you still get it because for whatever reason, maybe it's just because you are good at understanding people. Like, that it's not like, oh, that's just a throwaway joke. He's not attacking me essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I think of is for me, is that kind of like, okay, I get it. I get the issues, and why there are things with religion and their histories and their doctrines that are upsetting, and problematic, and that they're not just things that I've ignored. And I think that I don't have a good sense for how aware or how much attention a lot of other religious people pay to those type of things. But I think there's probably more attention to that than it might seem. So I think sometimes it seems like religious people are just turning off their minds or putting on blinders to any type of complexity. And I don't think that's the case. And I think that it's possible to relate a lot more than we might think. So for example, Alex, when we've been talking, all the issues that you've mentioned, I mean, you brought up things that have made me think in a different way. but nothing's been like, oh, that had never occurred to me, that would be upsetting, or how is that even, you must be like a different species to find that upsetting. That just hasn't happened, right? That humans are humans, we have our differences, but I think there are a lot more commonalities, especially as we start getting into this type of stuff. So that's one thing, is that we're not as different as it might seem sometimes, or that religious people are as unaware of those issues as it might seem sometimes.
I also think something that you said, that your gene, how you're like, I think some people just have the gene to like really care about this stuff. I think there's a lot of religious people who do not have that gene and honestly
Agreed.
just don't care.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that are.
So those are the wrong people, seculars, to talk to, because they're going to be like, I just want to live my life.
Yep, absolutely. And so, and I think there's a bit of there's kind of this transition period. I think in the Mormon Church that some people go through, where they're trying to figure things out and they want people to answer their questions. So they're sitting in an elders quorum and they're bringing up the tough questions, right? Not to be jerks, but because they're generally trying to figure things out. And other people are like, come on, man. I had a hard week at work and I'm just trying to get edified, and you're ruining it.
Yeah. I don't need to hear about the polygamy. I don't care.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think that's important. I appreciate that need for people not to be, super examining of everything, and to just kind of get a relief from all of that. I think that's an important thing too, and something that I have to remember a lot. Okay, and then another thing. I had another thing that I was going to mention that
I'm so sorry. That's my fault.
You got me off track. Okay. I'll just mention one other thing. So I think that a lot of times we don't realize, both religious and unreligious people, that fundamentalism or more modern versions of religious ideas are not the fundamentals or essentials. So, like, for example, when I talked about just the basics of God as being, or God is love, those are pretty abstract. Not to say that there's not a history of God, that has more to it. I would say the Bible is a document of that history, but people might respond saying, with the idea, like, I guess the secular response being, God is really, he's the Simpsons God. He's the guy with the big booming voice and the long beard, whose face you never see. You know who I'm talking about in The Simpsons,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think of that as kind of a caricature, right? So God, right? Yeah. There's these kind of associations with God that can either seem ridiculous, or just that's just the way things is, taken for granted, right? That God is a guy with white hair and a beard. Now, I don't think that is the I wouldn't say that that's the Orthodox view, and Orthodox is a tough term, because I don't want to disparage like the way people practice religion, right? As kind of folk practices. But I do think it's important to think, okay, for people who have done in-depth theology and thinking about religion, they tend to converge more with scientific worldviews and thinking. So, like in the Middle Ages, Aristotle there was kind of an Aristotelian renaissance. So people were reading Aristotle, including a lot of theologians, and a lot of it was kind of in tension with Christian thought. But they thought, well, this Aristotle guy, he said a lot of stuff that made sense. His logic and his metaphysics, it seems correct. And so they worked out the theologies in ways that they coincided, and they figured out, okay, we can learn some things about the nature of God and the nature of the world in conversation with this. That's very much like a non-fundamentalist Simpsons type view of God, but I would consider that more as like, if you're going to take the best of the best thinking that's been worked out in the history of religion and theology, it's not as different from the scientific worldview as it might seem, right? I mean, so like a scientific
Thor,
worldview,
essentially, what your ancestors called magic, we call
sort
science.
of, right? So, I think both theism and a scientific worldview overlap in seeing that there is an order to things, and that there's law-like principles that reality follows, right? And we look at those, but those are I think those can be merged without much difficulty. And so, and I guess what I'm responding to here is kind of the Sam Harris critique of Sam Harris. He complains about religious liberals, that they're not the real thing. They're not authentic. You're not really religious. It's the fundamentalists who really believe this stuff, where you religious liberals are just kind of pretending. And I think religious liberal is a fair description of me. And so, I do want to push back against that no, my religious belief and practice is genuine. It has a history and a pedigree that goes back hundreds of years. It's not some response to the developments of the new atheists or the developments of scientists over the past few decades. It's just not something made up, I guess.
Todd subliminally threw in the word attack there. Attack. Oh, I'm going to use another word now. Well, not to defend Sam Harris too much, because I don't need to. He can defend himself. But I think just maybe putting a little bit of a different spin on what he means by that is when he says like the fundamentalists believe this stuff, I think he's referring to the things that he knows you likely don't agree with. So, for example, stoning homosexuals. Like,
right,
you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
I think he's more referring to like the crazy, what Western society would deem the crazy rules. So the polygamy with 14-year-old girls that goes on with people like Warren Jeffs or whatever like that. I think he's more referring to those types when he says like they really believe it. Because there are some things where it's like,
yeah.
But that's what I got to be happy about with like, and I really do mean this. I'm not just trying to be like, oh, thanks, Alex, for throwing an attaboy towards the LDS Church. But like, the one thing is, as much as I think it is still behind, the LDS Church is constantly evolving. Like it always is. Like, I won't mention who this was, but I saw a person post like LDS. How do I say this? Like LDS and LGBTQ. Essentially, it was like, it's a book like that they're reading. I'm like, oh, just 20 years too late, but I'm glad that you're reading it. Like, it's one of those things that sucks, because it's just like, we've known this for a really, really long time. And when I say we, I feel like most people have known this for a really, really long time. And now I'm supposed to give you, well, it's like the Chris Rock routine. Like, what, you want a cookie? Congratulations. Congratulations for catching up to 20 years of us saying like, yeah, you know who's really not that bad and we shouldn't legislate against morally? The LGBTQ community.
Now, I have to ask, when you were in, okay, but you're younger than me, I guess. How old are you now?
I am 31 almost.
Okay, you're not that much younger than me. Okay, so when you were
Todd said like he seems really young.
No.
Alex acts is really young. Oh, you're only a year younger than me?
No. The reason is because there's been so much rapid change in the past few decades that it makes a difference.
To be rapid change.
But
relative to us, I think it's rapid change. You know what I mean? Like I'm a firm believer that historically, like things seem fast because all we have are these 30 years of like, oh, it didn't go that fast. I feel like there's probably some rapid change, but because we learned in a history class, like 1,000 years ago, it took them 50 years to finally not kill all of the natives.
Right.
Like, you know, like that's sorry.
When you were in junior high, would you say that the boys,
2001-ish.
okay, so would you say that the boys, whether religious or not, had very enlightened and progressive views on LGBT people?
The boys?
Yeah.
Who were the boys? Just boys in general? Like,
Yeah, yeah, the boys in junior high. Like,
oh, gotcha. That if they had very nuanced views of no. Oh, fair. I get what you're saying. I get what you're doing. Yes. They did
so
not. They did not have nuanced views, no.
so I mean, I guess what I mean is that it's not just that
It was society as a whole.
yeah, society as a whole has gone through this transformation.
But to be fair, I haven't been in too many junior high boys locker rooms recently.
Yeah, I mean, it might still
I mean, a
be
few years
the
ago,
same
yeah,
way.
because I put a video camera in, but
He's joking.
of course.
Yeah, no, maybe it still is the
That's a
same
good
way.
point.
It would be interesting to know,
It would
like,
be.
how progressive boys of that age are now.
Or if it's more secretive than it was back then.
Yeah. But so yeah, I mean, that's
Keep your
my
F
only
words
point
and
there.
Q words to yourself, kind of thing. Like, because I
Right.
know, like we would with reckless abandon throw words like that around.
Uh-huh.
Recently, I won't say what it was. Recently, I was just like, I don't know if you can say that anymore. Like, I hate that.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
it was a popular game where a person who has the football, everyone tries to attack or smear. It rhymes with the word smear.
Yes,
And like
yes.
they said, like, yeah, I used to play this game. I was like,
Right.
maybe not. Don't say that in a public setting. Because
Right.
it doesn't offend me because I know where you're coming from. I know
Mhm.
you the intent behind it, but anyone can run with that and make it bad.
Sure.
But that person was also an old person,
Yeah.
not a young person. So I don't think a
Right.
lot of young people are talking that way anymore. So I like that distinction that you make there. That like, but then once again, I hate the product of a time because my passive aggressive joke that I keep making in the abyss is I keep going, man, if only there was someone on this earth who could tell us what to do, which they probably think is like an honest plea, but really it's just nope, there allegedly is someone who professes to know
Yeah.
exactly what we should do who's not telling us what to do.
Right. And I remember, yeah, we brought that up in the last conversation, and that's just not.
Which is the
I
question,
don't really.
though. Like,
Yeah.
I think I shouldn't be doing that. Like, if I were a religious person, and what I would say to secular, like, you're not that smart. Like, I'm not that smart. I know that I'm not that smart. I know that I'm not that learned. And I feel like I have all of these gotcha lines that, like, I throw at people like, oh, with that line, there's no way that they are going to be able to weasel their way out of this
How are
one.
they going to recover from that one? Right.
But the thing is, do humans like being wrong? No human likes being wrong.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's not, again, that's somebody else might be able to give a better defense or response to that than me, but it's just not something that's on my
It's not that
radar, I
important.
guess. To me, it's not actually.
It's not that important, really.
But I wanted to talk about the progression.
Oh, good.
So like uh, Mike and we came up with an idea when we were talking about Mormonism being kind of this moment in the development of religious development, and I think there are a few sides of that. One that we were kind of talking about is Mormonism focusing on physical existence, the here and now, in certain ways that are unique. But we don't need to get into that right now. But the other one is this internal idea of progression, right? That it is right in the doctrine of Latter-day Saint or Mormon thought that things will change and progress. And I think that is a very powerful idea because it just is, it's already there, right? It's just being made explicit. So like we talked about in the Bible, there's constant change and development, and it seems to be going in a certain direction. And I think that, but it's not always recognized, right? And there's kind of a resistance to building on that, right? Oh, the Bible's done now, and there's not going to be any development beyond that. Where there's at least this idea in Mormonism that that's not the case, that it's continually open and developing, and that the future open, and I think that's a very important idea, and that is how I see society as a whole working through religion or religions, as kind of this development process. As much as it would be nice to have everything just, and I genuinely agree, like it would be nice to have everything laid out ahead of time, but for whatever reason, that's just not the way things work, right? So
when I say laid out, what I from our initial start of the conversation, where I'm like, it'd be nice to like know everything. It would be nice to just have like clear and cut rules. I don't know if I necessarily like, but then I morphed that into talking about like knowing the future.
Right.
I more just want to know what all of the rules are, because those constantly seem to be changing. Those seem to be frequently, depending on what year it is, what the climate of politics is, what the climate of what's popular at the time in culture seems to be what impacts what the rules are. Like, who was I just talking to about this recently, where I'm just like, not that I mind it, but it's hard for me to like, still, this is going to sound so stupid. I still, when I see chicks in bikinis who I know are LDS, I have like a little bit of judgment for them. And I'm sure somebody's thinking like, wow, how sexist. But like, once again, it's just like how much I really believed in that. Like believed in everything. Like, no, that's like, you're absolutely not. But then Alex gets rational and goes, you want to know what? Good. Women can do whatever they want. Like they should be allowed to choose how they dress and when they dress that way.
Yeah. And, even as a Mormon, I think that's something that, we can think about and address or decide, okay, maybe an absolute prohibition on that is not the right way to go. That there are other principles that we can investigate. That hasn't really happened at a broad level, but I do think that particular thing has changed a little bit in recent years.
But it will continue to evolve, because I have seen things that are changing, and I think we talked about this on the last one though, so I don't know how much you want to go into it. The idea, I love when I left Mormonism, where I was at with how the afterlife was going to be, where it was specifically going to be like, yep, everyone has essentially, unless you're a son of perdition, which son of perdition are just really, really bad people who deny the Holy Ghost and Jesus. I don't fully remember. Besides those people, which I don't know if I would count in that. I don't think I do, because I've never seen Jesus, but everyone has a chance to like get better. This would include people like Hitler, which I do think he should suffer for a long time, but not eternally. He did a lot of bad things. Like, I don't know. Hopefully this isn't a hot take and people are like, I can't believe, by the way, just broke Godwin's law. I need to find like someone else. Like, who's the guy who, I'll just go with Genghis Khan, the guy who raped all of all of the Eastern world. I don't even think he should be punished for forever.
For eternity, yeah.
And how do you, and I know that you kind of view it that way too, right? I'm not.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So with that type of God, and I'm going to go James Lipton from Inside the Actor Studio here. So when you finally do get to see God, is there like a specific thing that like you want to tell him, especially if it's the God that you've been envisioning this entire time?
Oh, so the way I understand God currently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it can be a question or a statement too. It doesn't have to just be like, oh, I love you. It could be that.
Well, that might be it, right? So part of my development in like the way I practice religion and pray when I'm alone is less verbal. So one of the ideas I've found interesting and inspiring in Christian history is this tradition called hesychasm, which is it's from Eastern Christianity, and it basically is stillness, and it's almost kind of like a meditation, but it's basically this idea that rather than filling the empty space with our own words and thoughts, we empty them and are receptive. And so you have this empty space in which the Spirit can fill, and so that's my own prayer becomes more like that with time. But it's difficult. It's to clear your mind and to have it just receptive rather than active and moving, especially for someone like me who's very theoretical and likes to think a lot. You can imagine that's kind of difficult. So my communication with God in the direction it's going currently is less verbal and more just kind of listening. And so I kind of think that it might be something like that. When I meet God directly, that I might not have much to say, um, and just want to bask, right? To receive, and to feel. Um, but if I were to say something, yeah, it would probably be something like thank you, or yeah, just gratitude. Um, and that would probably be about it. Um, but but then the theoretical side of me would certainly have would want to dig into things like, okay,
questions.
yeah, let's all right, great, let's let's I want everything,
Here's my assistant Shem
do the do the data dump, I want
to
it all.
answer
I want
all your questions.
just spend eternity receiving all the knowledge and insights and things like that.
Then I'd be interested to invert the question. And what would you want him to say to you?
Yeah. I think love and acceptance also. Um, so the "well done, thou good and faithful servant" line.
Yeah, I was hoping that wasn't going to be the answer.
I know, no, sorry. I
I
could
was
tell
always
you.
like, please, not the cliche.
Don't say that. Though maybe not even that, because I mean, the unconditional love, which I do think is a good description of God. I know sometimes we want to say, oh, but if you obey the commandments and this, I actually do think it is unconditioned. And I think one insight that I do think is valuable from the evangelical side is that God loves us in spite of good or bad that we do. And I guess one of the things I think of that my kids need to hear, and I hope is comforting to them, is that they're always accepted, they're always loved. And one of my, I guess, one of the tenderest things I can think of in my relationships with my kids is, when there's been some type of argument, heated, heated encounter, they're whining or screaming, have to go to timeout or something, and then they're just devastated. My girls will just, it's not even so much whatever they were upset about, but just the fact that I've condemned them to timeout, or expressed anger at what they've done, and they're just probably thinking, blowing it out of proportion, like, oh, this paternal relationship is destroyed, and to try and reassure them that that's not the case, and for me to repent for blowing up if I've done that, and to try to resolve and bring us back into reconciliation. But basically, to let them know that no matter what, that they can rely on me, that I love them, that there's nothing that they can do that would make me not love them. And so I think that would be what I would want to hear also, from a heavenly Father.
Yeah. I love that you're a father. I love having conversations with people who have children, because I feel like that, as dumb as this sounds, provides a little more insight into an actual godlike figure, at least the godlike figure that I
Yeah.
would approve of. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't like the idea of like someone who threw us into a simulation. I
Mm-hmm.
like the idea of the clockmaker God, just because at least he's absolved of all guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the vengeful God, the angry God that you see sometimes genociding and killing entire
Mm-hmm.
populations.
Yeah.
But when you compare it to your personal relationship with your daughters, I just think of when I'm watching my brothers and sisters, like with their kids. And so often, like, so for example, we have like these different epochs in life we want, these different benchmarks that we get to. So learning how to talk, learning how to walk, learning how to feed ourselves, learning how to deal with situations with friends, getting a job, going through school. Like there's a bunch of different things. These aren't, and I don't think I've even mentioned like one religious thing, but then there's the religious things too, getting
Yeah.
baptized, getting the priesthood, going on your mission, yada, yada, yada. And so if I, to steal my own question and then to answer it, because I loved what you said, that unconditional love part of it, following up on like the eternal progression part is whenever I see my siblings with their children, especially their young children that are growing up, they say when they're young, like, you're doing it, like you're walking, right? Like, oh,
Uh-huh.
congrats, you're doing it, you're doing it, you did it. And then you can see it in their eyes. They don't like say it, but as they get older, they don't say like, you did it, you're doing it. I would love for it to just be like, you arrive there because of the eternal progression part. He just goes, hey, you're doing it. It's only
Yeah.
one part done. You got a lot more to go. That's the reason I never like the well done, my good and faithful
Sure.
servant, is it's past tense as
Yeah.
opposed to a
Yeah.
continuation.
Yeah.
Which is something I could get behind. Everyone's going to be like, man, this must be so depressing to be you, Alex. Like, I hope so. I hope so much for that, even though I know how unlikely it is. Um, and then the question would be like, well, how do you know that it's unlikely? It's like, it just is, just because of how many different, although to be honest, I feel like that is the most likely of the gods, right? I just feel like it's the most likely of, if there is an afterlife,
Yeah.
that's how it's going to be. And sorry for kind of like making that last little part and going off for as long as I did, but I do hope for it. One of my
Yeah.
favorite scriptures still from the Book of Mormon is just having a desire to believe. And I'm constantly just I want that. I never
Mhm.
want that to go away. I always have the desire to
Sure.
believe, not necessarily in Mormonism, but in something. And I go back to, I'm trying to do all of the things in my life that are requisite to the God that I would worship, doing those things. So being nice to people as much as I can, donating my time, money, and resources to those different things.
Hmm.
Is it going to pay off in the long run for like this temporal existence? Not really, but I'm still holding out for a potential future after this.
Yeah. I mean, so an afterlife, I would say, is uh, it doesn't have to be an essential focus, right? I mean, or even probably an essential part of a religion. Um, so, but it certainly can be. And I think that the way you've described that, I do think that that's probably true. Something like that. I mean, I don't think we can really even envision what an afterlife would be like if it's not bodily. Then I don't know how we could imagine that, because we're embodied, right? The Christian view is that an afterlife is basically a resurrection, so you're brought back into bodily form. So it'd be similar to what we have now. um, but I do think that also, at its strongest, um, religion brings us to the present, and to look at what is right in front of us, um, and to look at it closer. So, it's you could ask the question: if there is no afterlife, um, what is the point of religion and God? Would there be anything to it still? And I think yes. If the answer is no, then I would encourage to look think about it in a different way, because I think, so for example, in the Hebrew Bible, for a long time, for most of the Hebrew Bible, there's really not much discussion of an afterlife, um, like in the negative or positive. It's just not really discussed. But there's still definitely a lot of God in that story, right? And people um, interacting with God and each other in religious ways. So I think that's kind of interesting to think about, like, how can we um, relate to each other in the here and now, in ways that um, go beyond just the surface level. Um, there's a lot of going through the motions in life. Um, so in my last conversation with Jacob, we talked about the importance of stepping outside of just the regular workaday life, where we're just making a living. And of course, that's essential and important. But stepping outside of that a little bit and looking at things in different ways or new ways is the basis of culture and a deeper life. And I think that's something that religion can help with. Not that it's the only thing, but I think it's an important thing.
Well, and not to like be the naysayer again, what once again concerns me is on paper and in theory, I love that. But then when you go into the actual practice of that, so many people convolute it with the specifics and the dogma specifically. I'm not going to, I just because I don't want to offend your listeners or mine, mom. Mom would be the only one that'd be offended by this. But I feel like there are certain things where people spend a lot of their time and efforts in my former religion of like a being LDS, where I'm like, man, if you would have, instead of going and doing that thing every single week that you made a goal of yours, which I guess it's good to have goals. I'm like, you could have done so much more. I know how long it takes to do that one thing. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Just imagine in a 52-week year, that's 104 hours that could have gone to doing anything else. Granted, I know as humans, we usually waste our time anyway. So here I am, the guy who played video games for an hour yesterday. Like, I understand that I'm being a hypocrite when I say this. It's just, there are like these really weird random things, which, and to be completely fair, maybe it's actually a good thing that people do those. Like, I don't know. Maybe it makes them better, or it helps them fulfill from a service standpoint in another way by doing that and having that regular weekly thing that they do. It's just like, I'm being over judgmental, if I'm being quite honest. I just, because I love what you said, where even if there isn't an afterlife, there is still value that religion can bring to us. It's just obviously to each person, what that value is going to be relative.
It will, yeah.
Person.
So like, sorry, I keep on bringing up other conversations, but they all overlap. So I talked with Jack, I think in the very first podcast episode, about the effective altruism movement, which is basically this. I don't want to. I'm gonna not do justice to it, but basically thinking of ways to allocate our time and resources in the most effective manner to do the most good. But I think there's a side of that that can also kind of disparage anything that's not doing that. So anything that's not directly impacting the utility of
which is what
somebody else, that's making the world a better place, or putting food on other people's tables, that there's something morally wrong with that. I don't buy into that view, because I think it's a question of ends. To what end is our existence? It's not only to it's not only to exist, to breathe air and eat food and sleep. We do need those things. I do think it's important to save lives and to have save people from starvation and disease, but to a certain end, right? So that they can do things that they find fulfilling beyond just survival, and that is relative to the person as well. So I think there are a lot of things that from the outside look wasteful, but from the inside can be very meaningful. And I think that in the modern world, we run the risk of sometimes measuring everything by its ROI, return on investment, or how it expands our capital assets, and not that those things aren't important, but they can expand to take over everything. And I think that diminishes our existence.
It's because we put too high of a value on it. Like, because
Sure,
it's exactly
sure.
what he says. It's when you say it's not that it's not important, it's like, well, it's important, but only so much so. So I
Yeah.
agree with that. Like, I think, the common thing where the thing that people say they regret the most on their deathbed is that they didn't spend more time with their family. I think that is a good analogy for a lot of things. It's not necessarily just not spending time with family. I
Mhm.
honestly think people regret not doing more for themselves as well, like
Yeah.
throughout time. And I say this to my team pretty regularly. I'm like, probably should admit this. We need to take this as seriously as possible so that we can provide for our families.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, you're not going to remember very much of anything that you did in your time here. Like, this is all a means to an end to
Mhm.
get to, once again, to provide for your family. Because I think that's where a big problem in life is. And like, I just did it where I was like judging people for not allocating their time and resources in the way that I deemed appropriate. And that's unfair. If I'm being quite honest, I'm trying to be less hard on things like that, but
Mhm.
these hard. But these are the things that these are the things that like go on in my mind like fairly regularly.
Mhm.
And as I purge them, I find that I become more and more happier. The less I care about what other people are doing, which is hard for me to do, like, quite honestly,
Mhm.
the happier I become. So I just try to chase that dragon as much as I can because
Sure.
it feels great. Like, and I can't control what they do anyway. So what's the point?
Right.
What's the point? Like, even I think of like podcasts that I've done in the past, like, how have I inspired people to actually change with all of my outrage and anger? The answer is zero. So obviously I need to take a different approach to it because it
Mhm.
doesn't seem to be working. And as I've stopped caring about it, life for me just seems to get way better and easier. So
Well, that's good.
just let those people have their things and whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But I also don't like that because it almost comes across like nihilistic, where it's just like nothing really matters. This is all just a huge joke. Because it if you want to go broadly, this doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
But if you get more specific, it's a very, very important thing. It's the one life that we have.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other last minute things that you would want the secular world to know about people of faith? I'm not going to use religious because, like, people of faith,
Sure.
people that have faith.
Um, yeah. So this is maybe an interesting one to end on. But so I had some thoughts last night as I was just going through, like, okay, what are we going to talk about tomorrow? About this view of Christ, of how we treat the least of these. Um, and this gets back a little bit to the history of Christianity, and privileging less like the aristocracy and the best of the best, right? Um, One of the things that I think is a potential pitfall um, in a kind of uh, de-Christianized society as we get away from uh, some of the traditions that we've inherited, is that we might start looking again at that bottom line as like, okay, the value of this person is their return. How much are they adding to our GDP, um, or are they a drag on society? Um, and I think we need to be very careful about not um, valuing people in that way. And it's something that I see both. It's definitely been something that's uh, like in communist societies, kind of paradoxically, the value of human life has been instrumental. Like, okay, we're going to have the communist utopia, and if you get in the way, then you're expendable. We can kill you, and millions of people have died because of that. So that's a fault of the left. But I'm also seeing kind of on, I guess, the alt-right would be one way it's described. But I'd say it's like either a secular right wing or Christian in name only right wing, where it's like Christians more like a banner of tribe, right? Like rah rah Christians,
Yeah.
rah rah America, but not really getting into, okay, what does that mean? And so like drains on society, people on welfare are people that are, I'm paying for that,
No, you're
or
not.
they should just, um, we should just let these people die or starve themselves. Those type of ideas are very concerning to me. And or even just that we should privilege the best of the best, like we should not focus on people who are lower IQ. We should focus on the people who are high IQ and privilege them, and put all our efforts in them, make sure they get into. Now I do think it's good, like, to give people the resources that they need to meet their potential, right? So I have no problem with advanced placement courses and things like that. But the value of a human life, that it would be based on IQ or intelligence, I have a big problem with. Um, and or any other type of metric that could be put on a person, or that somebody is worth less because they are less intelligent, or have some type of frailty, or um, or even have a predisposition to crime. Um, all of those things um, should not detract from the value that we place on them. And that's not that's kind of a hard thing to defend, um, just based on rational grounds. I mean, I think it's possible to do, with certain assumptions built in, but it's not a natural way to think. Um, but I think whether you adopt the rest of Jesus's system of ideas, I think it's a very important idea to capture this idea that what matters is the way you treat the person who's valued least. Um, that's what defines who you are and how you stand from the religious perspective. How you stand in God's presence is how you've treated that person. Um, and so I think, to the extent that we are secular, um, we should retain that. That is going to be very important, because I don't like the road that we go down if we lose that.
I think that is probably the best way of describing you as well. So I do, even though you're like, this is a weird one to end on, spot on, Todd, by the way. Um, I appreciate it because I think it's 100% factual. I see everything from a distance, obviously, so I don't know you. I'm not going to even pretend to like know your wife, your kids, your living situation well at all, just based on the conversations that we've had in the disc. That's like what I'm basing this on, and these types of conversations. But the one thing that I can just say thank you for and show gratitude to you for is it for the, I don't want to use the words that you used, but like, you are a champion of the loser. Like you are a
Mhm.
champion of those people who are downtrodden and struggle, and you try to lift them up. And when I say that, I don't even specifically mean people who are regularly the losers. I can, even in like specific situations where somebody is struggling with something that they're not normally, they're this person that's elevated very, very highly, high intelligence, whatever, but for whatever reason they go into a low. You are regularly there. Um, and I'm very appreciative of that. Not to say that I'm like that intelligent person or whatever. I've seen it with other people who are far more intelligent than me in the abyss. And it's very heartwarming. And I also just love seeing you with your kids, because like that's, I feel like, a really great way of determining the amount of love that a person has is the way that they interact with their children, because the
Sure.
amount of love and capacity for love that you have obviously increases with children that you have. So it's just going to make you a better citizen, hopefully, generally speaking, overall. There are some people who I see who are terrible with their kids and they don't seem to enjoy them at all, but you're not one of those people.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you for that. I think it was a wonderful conversation as always. I always feel elevated and pumped afterwards. So I hope that
Yeah.
anyone that's listening to this feels that same way. Hope to have more conversations like this, not necessarily like religious based either, but I feel like
Yeah.
it's really easy for me to talk about that kind of stuff. But yeah, thanks a ton, Todd. The next time that we have something that we want to talk about, we hope you give it a listen.